back. Continuing our interview with Dave Kenny. This is part 2. I hope you're going to learn something. I'm sure you will. So stay tuned. Dave, thanks for staying with us. Let's keep talking.
Absolutely.
All right, buddy.
So,
Did you ever get to go overseas and serve any?
no, now, it's like during the Afghan episode of our history, if you were in the reserves, you were almost sure to go. Back then, the Army was large and could not go that deep on the bench, if you will.
So how long were you in the military?
6 years, it's an obligation.
Got it. Once you got out, what did you do then? Because we're winding down time here. Tell us about bring us from then.
Well, back then, then I switched into reliability at Truck and Bus.
Truck and Bus.
And that dealt with what happens to the vehicle after it's built, not quality, which is while it's built. We monitored warranty, tried to figure out if things were failing too much and how much things were costing to repair. And eventually, in this whole time period, it was when computers were coming into the fore. And it was kind of rudimentary compared to what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
Things ran off of mainframes. You had a little display in front of you. And
were you drawn to those, or were you repelled by those?
I was. I thought that was great stuff.
Yep.
Of course, the real geniuses were down in the information technology department. And you'd go down there and watch the magic happen. You'd say, I need this particular report, but maybe tapping away in the language you had no idea what they were typing out. And up would come whatever you needed. Eventually, while I was in reliability, a request came in to fulfill a new operation that was going in down at the tech center. And that dealt with corporate quality reliability.
A level up.
A level down the road.
Now, were you on the field team, or were you in the...
I was in the data team. I would go out into the field every now and then, sort of get the experience.
Sure.
But
were there people at that point in your life who were influential on you, helped you?
Oh, sure. When I got down to the group, the guy that headed up our data center, he was very, very smart. We were writing stuff in BASIC.
That means more to you than me.
BASIC was the original
Okay.
high-level language of PCs,
Okay.
which were not that great at that time. I got a PC on my desk, and it had 32 megabytes of storage, and people came in and said, who do you know? Far cry from today. My cell phone has bazillions more storage capability. But yeah, that was a great experience. But there were Mike Ryan was the guy that really I learned a lot from.
Good.
And we had a good boss, and he was very understanding of some of the criteria that we had, some of the troubles that we had, and he guided us through there.
Don and Jerry were going to get to go to Europe, but Don wasn't able to go for business purposes, so Mary invited her little brother.
Yeah, I got a surprise call while I was at GM, and my sister called and said, "Hi, Dave, how you doing? Blah blah blah. How'd you like to go to Europe?" And I'm going, "Well, of course, I'd love to go to Europe." And so I said, "Well, what's the occasion?" Well, we had this whole trip planned, and was with my sister from Buffalo and her husband, and Don and Jerry were going to go to Europe and drive a car all the way around, sort of the Grand Tour. Well, it turned out that Don was in negotiation with Chrysler, and he couldn't make it. So Jerry called up and said, "Well, how'd you like to go?" And I go, "Oh boy." So the GM bosses were kind of startled that because it was short notice, I had to run and get a passport. I didn't have one. It was raining the day I went, so my passport picture looked pretty awful. Anyhow, we flew to London, stayed there for a while. My nephew Christopher was there for religious purposes, and he drove us around, which was kind of terrifying because you're on the wrong side of the road, and all of a sudden you're making a left-hand turn like we make a right-hand turn, and that was unnerving.
Yes.
I almost got killed. I was crossing a street, and what do? When you're looking here, you look to your left, right? I looked to the left, there was no traffic coming. I had a hand on my collar and pulled me back.
Wow.
Guy looked at me and said, "Yank?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah."
Oops. And somebody's coming down from the right way.
Right. From there, we went, took a ferry to the Hook of Holland and a train, go into Amsterdam, rented a car in Amsterdam. Then it was a drive essentially through Europe, through Paris, Lyon, Monaco, Pisa, Rome, Venice, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Belgium. It was a good 2 weeks.
If you could talk about that, what did you learn? Any things that you didn't know? I mean, we're only North American here.
Mm-hmm.
What did you bring back with you about European cultures, plural, that you didn't know before?
Well, there was always a rumor that the French were kind of uppity about, Americans.
I've heard that rumor.
But I had taken French in high school,
True.
and we were in Lyon, and they had said, well, you can go to this other restaurant if you really want a nice meal. We went there, and the restaurant was closed. So we're sitting there looking around for a place to go. I see this guy coming out of his car. He's got his sweater tied around his neck. He's got a bottle of water. And I hailed him and said whatever French I needed to say.
En français.
And I said, so if you were taking your girlfriend to dinner tonight, where would you go? Danielle et Denise.
Yeah.
Little tiny restaurant, no bigger than this studio here. And it was incredible. Apparently they had write-ups from all over France. And
Excellent.
so that was not cheap, but it was very good. But it was a very interesting trip. You learn a lot about people's perceptions of you as an American. And some are very accepting, some are kind of standoffish, some Americans will talk to anybody, and they don't do that in Europe a lot. But that was that trip, and it was really, really enjoyable.
So, you traveled when you were young-ish, and then you've done a bunch of traveling since then.
Oh, yeah.
Give me an example or two of some of the places you've gone and what makes those special.
Well, one of the places we went to Hawaii. We traveled with some friends of ours generally, and John and Val Cass. John has passed since, but we still travel with Val, and we decided we'd go take a trip to Hawaii. And at the time, John had this big video camera. That he said, oh, that was no problem. Well, you start lugging that sucker around, it gets deposited back at the hotel after a short time.
Yep.
But Hawaii was interesting. I mean, just the environment there. And we went to Maui, and the first thing that we saw when we were going along Maui was this big rainbow over the hills. It was kind of like one of these travel brochure pictures.
Welcome to
like,
Hawaii.
we're here. We stopped off at a little place, Lahaina, I think it was called. Ate at a restaurant. We're looking up at the wall, and it was covered in license plates. And the name of the bar was Moose McGillicuddy's.
Sounds like a typical Hawaiian name.
And all the license plates were from Michigan.
Really?
So it was an expat.
Yep. Got it.
But
Do you enjoy Hawaii? I'm sure.
Hawaii, one of the other places we went to was Hilo.
Okay.
I think that's in Kauai, not sure. Anyhow, we stayed in Volcano National Park, right on the rim of the volcano, and the one that's erupting right now is off in the distance. You go, oh. And I was just reading a newspaper one morning. I got up early. People were lining up to go to breakfast, and I'm sitting here and I'm reading the paper. And I'm looking over and I'm going, why are they walking like that? They were walking like they were on a ship.
Ooh, okay.
Then I looked up at the chandelier. The chandelier was swinging back and forth. The people at the desk kind of looked at the chandelier, looked at themselves, and bolted out the door. We're having an earthquake.
And they're not used to that.
I wasn't. I'd never been in an earthquake before. Yeah. So that was a very interesting thing to do. But
Certainly.
being on, and we toured around the volcano and what have you, and we eventually went into Kona.
Let's move. You mentioned that you've taken some other cruises and stuff like that.
Right.
Any,
We got-
any cruising that you care to talk to us about?
The Windstar cruises were great. We went to Rome. We went to Barcelona. We've gone to Venice. Other trips we've gone to Turkey.
So on all that travel, what did you bring back? What did you learn that you didn't know before you went to those places? Because it's one thing to see amazing things. It's another
Right.
thing to have memories that were kind of surprising
Right.
and kind of remarkable.
There's always the very, very insistent vendors.
That's okay.
Everybody wants to bargain. We don't do that here in the States. Vendors sometimes are insulted that you just want to pay a set price, and you're going, oh, come on, make this game play. But it was that was an interesting thing. Another was we were in one of the big mosques in Istanbul, the Blue Mosque, I think it was, and our guide said, you know, in your churches, your Christians, you believe that they're holy places. This is simply a gathering area where people can come and worship, but it's not holy in and of itself.
A different perspective.
Some sects within Muslim religion might argue with that now, but
Different perspective, though. Yeah.
huh?
Different perspective.
Different perspective. And you learn an awful lot about the ebb and flow of history. Well, you know, here we are in Naples, and this is a Venetian castle here, or not a Venetian, yeah, a Venetian castle. And it's like, what are they doing here?
Venice is over there.
Yeah, but there was a lot of ebb and flow of who was in charge in the Mediterranean. But we've been to Croatia. We have a separate trip I took with my brother-in-law, who called one day and said, Dave, I'm going to Europe. I'm going to Egypt. Oh, that's really nice.
Egypt, yeah.
And I said, well, I hope you have a good time. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. My wife doesn't want to go.
I see.
How'd you like to go to Egypt?
So he's
And
looking
I
for
thought
a
about it for
fill-in.
about 2 seconds and said, yes.
Excellent.
And we put our money down, and it was through a club called Nomads. They had their own plane. As a matter of fact, one of Don's relatives was actually the pilot. And we put our money down, and as the day approached, 9/11 happened.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
So the trip was off, but Nomads offered us the opportunity to keep our hat in the ring. And sure enough, a year later, we were able to fly to Egypt. And as usual, on a lot of travel like that, you go to Amsterdam first, and then you fly to Egypt. That was quite the trip. That was like getting steeped in ancient history.
Really?
Yeah. We flew up to, I think it was called Abu Simbel,
Okay.
where they sliced these huge carvings off of the Nile. They were going to build this huge dam,
The dam.
and everything was going to get flooded.
That's one.
So they literally sliced these these huge Egyptian statues off the face of a mountain and moved them up.
This is amazing.
I mean, a big operation. But that's where we started. And then we came down to Aswan and got on a riverboat and sailed down. And it was kind of like going back in history. You're sitting there, you're having a drink on the balcony of one of these riverboats, and you're looking across, and here's a guy with a bunch of sugarcane strapped to a donkey, wearing the usual Egyptian costume, and a little boy similarly dressed behind. That could have been 1,000 years ago.
We're not in Kansas anymore.
You're not in Kansas anymore. And the other thing you really noticed was by the Nile, it's green, green, green. And within sight, it's desert.
Would you encourage people to travel to Egypt on a vacation?
You have to look at the political climate. They depend a lot on tourism, and will do what they have to do to protect you. As a matter of fact, we actually had this little Fiat always followed our bus around, and we're looking at them, and it turned out they were Egyptian police, and just making sure nothing happened to us.
Taking care of the money.
Right. Our guide was a incredibly knowledgeable guy, but he had a guy that would travel with him, and he would go off and get the tickets to whatever site we were at and come back in and give out the tickets. We were getting off the bus one time, and we were waiting to assemble and move along, and a breeze came up, and he was wearing a sports coat. And whoa, he had an Uzi strapped under his, he was part of the police.
Got it.
So we went to the Valley of the Kings, and one of the guides said they had an incident there shortly before we got there. Some people got killed. And we're looking up in the hills around this Valley of the Kings, and I said, why are those guys up there? He said, they're snipers, just in case.
Just in
I'm
case.
going, oh, good.
Not something we have to worry about in Oxford.
All right.
Yep.
Lately, we've traveled back to Hawaii, my wife and I.
I heard. Yep.
And you're talking about, well, what did you learn? Well, you're driving along, and you realize how committed they are to solar power there.
Okay.
Practically every third house had solar panels on it. Of course, fossil fuel is expensive. Everything there has to be shipped in terms of what we consider pretty normal here,
And
except for
sun's-
pineapples.
Sun's free. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a great life, and you've got a lot of experiences that, hopefully the folks who are watching could share those things and maybe
Yeah.
look at some of those places. So I want to thank you again. This has been fun to listen to all the things you've done and all the places you've been.
Yeah. Years ago, my son Jeff, he was in grade school, and he had to write a paper, and he came back and he was going to write it on me. He says, so Dad, tell me about the things that put dents in your life, which I thought was an interesting perspective. You start out as a new car and you accumulate dents as you go.
That's a well-phrased question, isn't it? We have plenty of dents, right?
So here I am, dented but still walking.
Excellent. Oh, we're mighty glad that you're dented, and we're mighty glad you're still walking.
Right.
So, well, in a minute, we'll be back to learn some more. Stay tuned. You're 30-some years in GM, and then what happened when you left GM? We'll kind of compress here a little bit. We're running through time.
Okay.
After you went out of GM, what'd you do then?
Well, of course, while I was at GM,
Sure.
just as EDS came in.
Yes.
And if your fingers were anywhere close to a keyboard, you were captured. And these young people in blue suits would come in and put little tags all over your equipment. And anyhow, we got absorbed into EDS, and they had a different culture, and you had to get used to that. Eventually, I retired from GM and EDS, and after that, EDS sort of got absorbed over time into Hewlett-Packard,
Yep.
and that was the end of that. Anyhow, then I was retired. Anyhow, I joined a choir even before that at St. Joe's,
Okay.
and really enjoyed it. And then I became a cantor, singing individually,
Yeah.
and a lector. And I really enjoyed that. And while I was doing that, the manager of OCTV at the time, who also worked at the tech center, ran into him and he said, "Dave, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to keep off the street." But and he said, "Come on, go to work for, just part-time for Oxford Community Television." And that's how I got my start here.
Interesting.
And initially just picking up the video camera and going and recording meetings. And at that time, using the technology we had, we would create DVDs on the spot with a little device that Sony had at the time. And that went along until we got the ability to broadcast with an outfit called Lightronics. Lightronics, as time went on, lost their edge with us, and we got a new system called Telview here now.
Now, is this accurate that early on things were, whatever the state of the art was, it was there, and then things changed a lot. Technology changed, and
So
people changed.
technology changes, yes.
When you started out, did you have any idea what you needed to do as far as video capturing meetings and stuff like that? Did anybody train you in that?
Yep, they did. And it was a pretty slick operation.
Good.
The resolution of televisions and our recording at the time was what it was. It wasn't as good as it is now. As a matter of fact, it looks pretty bad compared to what we have now. But technology changed, and
Now, how do you feel when you started out in this world, new world for you, of making video recordings? How do you feel about that?
it was interesting because it kind of plugged you in, especially for political meetings.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and Oxford, of course, does the political meetings of Oxford Township, Addison Township, Village of Leonard, and the Village of Oxford. So it gave you an opportunity to see things and how they run, what the issues were that you were pretty ignorant of before, quite frankly.
Well, if we don't go, I'll say myself, if we don't go to meetings, there's a lot of information we don't get that would be available if we just got off our, sofas.
And some of the meetings demanded some physical strength.
How so?
Some of the meetings went for over 3 hours.
Wow.
And when you're just sitting there trying to train a camera on whatever was going on,
Got it.
you go, oh.
That could wear me out.
So it was fun. But like I said, you learned a lot of things that were completely unknown to you, really.
Sure.
How things worked, how things got done in a village, and
So-
in a political situation.
About roughly what age might you have been when you started this Oxford TV endeavor?
Up 50.
Okay. So there's a lot of learning going on after your corporate career, and you.
No, actually, I was 60. Okay,
Okay. All right.
I lied.
After you were doing the video stuff, what happened next at Oxford TV?
Well, as history repeats itself, one manager, we'll say, left. Another manager came in. He didn't last long. And now we have Turi Stiles,
You do.
who's an excellent manager.
She is.
And we learn a lot from her, too. She's a graduate of Specs Howard, which specifically teaches how to run a station, essentially.
Got it. And how do you and she work together? What's the role that she has, and what's the role that you have, and how does that connect to each other?
Well, at the core of it, we have to come up with a budget every year.
Sure.
And we have to analyze where our expenses are, where our potential income is, and make a projection as to where we want to be.
Sure.
And sometimes that's not so easy. You have to, rob Peter to pay Paul.
Windy. Now, in not specific, but in general terms, where does the money come from that is used to keep Oxford Community Television functioning?
Well, if you have cable television,
Cable?
which would be Spectrum in this area,
Got it.
and sometimes Comcast, depending on some peripheral areas, or AT&T, because they have to string cable along easements that are owned by the townships or the villages. The law says they have to compensate these villages and townships a certain amount,
Okay.
and that's called a franchise fee.
A franchise fee.
Now, the franchise fee is kind of an optional thing for the township or the political organization. They can keep all of it. They can allocate a portion of it to our station, and then use the other part to do whatever their expenses are in their locale. There's also another item in there called a PEG fee, and that's a negotiable thing that they have to do when they initially sign the contract with the cable provider. And that's a fixed amount that's agreed upon, but that all goes to the cable station.
Okay.
So that's our source of income.
So money that is essentially coming from either the cable TV, the cable companies themselves, or these PEG fees are the thing that keep this thing afloat.
Right.
I've noticed that over the years, cable cutting is highly discussed these days.
Yes, yes.
Would that mean that in the future there may be less likely income to support community television like this?
It's a possibility. There is, all the cable stations throughout the United States are subject to that same risk of, as people cut cables
Sure.
and go away from the actual cable provider, well, those franchise fees could theoretically go down. There is an organization called ProTech, which we're going to belong to, that lobbies in Washington to maintain those rights-of-way franchise fees, they call them. And I know the cable companies, on their part, are probably doing the opposite.
It's like it's all about
Yep.
money.
And there's also the issue of, say you do cut cable and you go to a streaming. Well, are those companies that are providing the streaming, they're not paying any franchise fees, and that's part of that lobbying organization trying to get some money in that regard.
Got it. So it seems to me like maintaining a public television station, which was solidly financed for a long time. In the future, the funds may either come from different places, or there may be less funds to be able to provide programming and stuff like that. Could those be possibilities?
Que sera, sera.
Yeah, indeed.
What will be, will be.
So we are here today.
Yeah.
You and I are talking today, and today is all we have, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, two things. One, I want to thank you for all that you do to make this station work well. And two, I want to keep talking to you off camera about what's going on in the future, because I'm always fascinated. But
Oh, it's been great talking to you.
thank you for the time. I appreciate that. So, thank you, sir.
See you at lunch.
See you at lunch. So, after a good discussion with Dave Kenny about life and public television, we hope that you have had a great time and learned a lot too. So, for today, in the program My Life, this is Chuck Cameron saying, I hope you have a great one. So long.